A woman walked in and asked if the aisle that forgets you was still open. The door chimed once, a flat electronic note that lingered longer than it should have. I remember that clearly because I looked up expecting the sound to cut off, and it didn't. It just thinned out and stayed there under the hum of the lights. She stood just inside, not moving further in. "Is it still open?" she asked again, like I hadn't answered. I hadn't. "I'm sorry," I said. "The aisle," she said. "The one that forgets you." She spoke calmly, like she was asking about the restroom or the coffee machine. Her hands were empty. Her coat was zipped all the way up despite the warmth inside. "We don't have," I started, then stopped. Something about the way she was looking at me made finishing the sentence feel unnecessary. I glanced down the aisles out of habit. They looked the same. Narrow, uneven rows under dim fluorescent strips that buzzed faintly overhead. Some sections were brighter than others. The back corner always flickered. "I think you might have the wrong store," I said. She didn't react, just tilted her head slightly, considering me. "No," she said. "It's here. It's always here." The hum above us dipped for a second, then steadied. I became aware of the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, faint but constant. The register screen glowed softly in front of me, numbers I didn't remember entering sitting there without context. "I can check the back," I said, though I didn't know why I said it. She nodded like that was expected. "Thank you." I stepped out from behind the counter. The tile felt colder than it should have through my shoes. As I moved down the first aisle, something caught my eye. An entire row of canned drinks I didn't remember stocking. The labels were unfamiliar. Not new, just not something I could place. I slowed, trying to recall when they'd been delivered. Nothing came. The hum of the lights seemed louder here, uneven, pulsing faintly. I turned into the next aisle. Halfway down, I stopped. There was a note taped to one of the shelves. My handwriting. I knew it immediately, the shape of the letters, the way I pressed too hard on certain strokes. "Don't go past this point." I stared at it, trying to remember writing it. Couldn't. A faint pressure built behind my eyes, like trying to recall a dream that wouldn't hold still. I reached up and peeled the note off. The adhesive made a soft tearing sound. On the back, there was more writing. "If she asks, say it's closed." My chest tightened. I folded the note quickly, slipping it into my pocket without thinking. Behind me, something shifted. I turned. The aisle was empty, but for a moment, I had the distinct impression someone had just stepped out of view. I listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just the hum and the faint buzz of the cooler units. I kept walking. The next aisle felt longer than it should have. I knew the layout. I'd worked here long enough to walk it without thinking. But now the spacing felt off, like the shelves had been pushed further apart, stretching the distance. At the end, the flickering light buzzed erratically. And there was an opening, a narrow gap between shelves that I didn't remember being there. I stopped a few steps away. The light above it flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. The air coming from it was colder. Not a draft exactly, more like the absence of warmth. I stood there, trying to decide if it had always been like this. Couldn't remember. My shift start time slipped from my mind as I tried to place it. I knew I had one. I knew I'd clocked in. But the number was gone. I stepped closer. The shelves on either side of the gap were stocked with items I didn't recognize. Packaging without brands, colors that felt slightly wrong. I turned to leave. The aisle behind me didn't look right. The spacing was off again. Too long. Too dim. For a second, I couldn't remember which direction led back to the counter. I blinked, and the layout snapped back into place. Normal. I exhaled slowly. "Just tired," I muttered. My voice sounded unfamiliar. I stepped into the gap. The light above me flickered once, then stabilized into a steady, low hum. The aisle beyond was narrow. Too narrow. The shelves were closer together, forcing me to turn slightly as I walked. The products here were indistinct, labels blurred as if they refused to be focused on. I reached out to touch one. My hand hesitated halfway. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I was there. The thought slipped away as soon as I tried to hold it. I lowered my hand. Further down, I saw movement. Someone standing between the shelves. My first instinct was that it was the woman. But something felt off. The posture wasn't right. The figure shifted slightly, turning just enough that I could see its face. It was me, or something close enough that my mind accepted it before rejecting it a second later. The expression was neutral, calm, like it had been waiting. I took a step back. My heel caught on something. I stumbled, grabbing the shelf to steady myself. The products rattled softly. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. The aisle stretched empty ahead of me. My head felt light, unfocused. I turned and walked back the way I came. The gap between the shelves appeared sooner than it should have. I stepped out into the main store. The hum of the lights felt louder here. The woman was still at the counter, waiting. "Well?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came. For a second, I couldn't remember what she'd asked. I felt the note in my pocket and pulled it out, unfolding it. "Don't go past this point." Below it, in my own handwriting, "You went in again." My hands trembled slightly. I looked up at her. "It's closed," I said. The words felt practiced, like I'd said them before. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right," she said softly. She turned and walked out. The door chimed. This time, the sound cut off immediately. I stood there, holding the note. The store felt settled. Normal. I looked down at the register. The screen showed a completed transaction. Items listed that I didn't remember scanning. Total paid. Receipt printed. I glanced toward the aisles. For a moment, I couldn't remember which one I had just come from. I unfolded the note again. The handwriting was mine, but I didn't remember writing any of it. At the bottom, in smaller letters I hadn't noticed before, there was one more line. "This one thinks he's the first." A faint flicker came from the back of the store. I looked up. The narrow gap between the shelves was still there, waiting, the light above it buzzing softly. I tried to recall when I'd first seen it. Couldn't. I tried to remember the start of my shift. Nothing. The note trembled slightly in my hand as I read it again. "You went in again." I looked toward the aisle. For a moment, I had the distinct sense that someone was already standing inside it, watching, waiting for me to step back in. I wasn't sure if I had already done that, or how many times, or whether the person holding the note now was the one who had written it. The light flickered once. The gap seemed to widen, and I stood there, trying to decide if I should close it, or if I was already the version that never remembers how.
The store's clock ticked forward, but only when I wasn't looking. I didn't notice it at first. It was just part of the background, like the hum of the lights or the soft mechanical sigh of the refrigerators cycling on and off. The clock hung above the cigarette display behind the counter, round and white, its hands black and thin enough to disappear if you didn't focus on them. I only really looked at it to check how much longer my shift had left. That was when it didn't move. It was just past 2:10 a.m. I remember because I stared at it, waiting for the second hand to advance. It hovered just before the 12. I waited. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Somewhere in the store, a plastic wrapper shifted faintly, settling. The second hand didn't move. I blinked, leaned in slightly. Nothing. Then, without thinking, I glanced down at the register. When I looked back up, the second hand had jumped. Not a tick. Not a smooth movement. It was suddenly 3 marks ahead. I frowned, watching it again. It stopped, perfectly still. I waited longer this time, counting silently in my head. 1, 2, 3. No movement. I looked down again, just for a second. Back up. Another jump. This time, 5 seconds. A cold, quiet feeling settled into my chest. I stepped out from behind the counter, moving slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the clock as I approached it. The tile felt colder than it should have through my shoes, like the temperature dropped a little the further I moved from the register. The second hand didn't move. I stood directly beneath it now, craning my neck upward. Still nothing. The store felt too quiet. I turned my head slightly, glancing toward the nearest aisle. When I looked back, The second hand had leapt forward again. This time, nearly 10 seconds. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I muttered, though I didn't know what I was agreeing with. I stepped back, keeping the clock in my peripheral vision, trying to catch it in motion. It didn't move. It only changed when I wasn't looking. The realization felt precise. Clean. I tested it. I fixed my gaze on the second hand, then deliberately turned away for exactly 1 count. When I looked back, it had advanced. 7 seconds. I tried again. Look away. Look back. 12 seconds. The intervals weren't consistent. They were increasing. I became aware of the rest of the store in a different way then, like everything had shifted just slightly out of alignment. The aisle to my right looked longer than I remembered. Not obviously, just enough that the back wall felt further away. I stepped toward it. The shelves were stocked the same, rows of drinks and snacks facing forward. But something about the spacing was off. I turned my head to check the clock again. When I looked back at the aisle, it felt longer. The end had pulled further away. I stopped walking. The hum of the lights deepened, almost imperceptibly. I turned fully, looking back at the counter. It looked further too. Not much. Just enough to make me question whether I'd been standing closer before. I walked back. The distance felt longer than it should have. When I reached the counter, I checked the register. The screen showed a total. 1,480 yen. I hadn't scanned anything. There was no one in the store. I stared at the item list. 3 products were listed, names I recognized, but I couldn't remember touching them. I checked the bagging area. Empty. I swallowed, my throat dry, and pressed the clear button. The total reset. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then steadied. I glanced up at the clock. The second hand jumped. Nearly 20 seconds this time. My stomach tightened. I looked away again, quickly. Back. Another jump. Longer. I realized I was breathing faster. Each time I looked away, something progressed. Not just the clock. I turned toward the aisles again. The one on the left now seemed deeper than before, the shelves stretching further into shadow. I walked a few steps into it, counting the rows. 1, 2, 3. I turned my head slightly, just enough to break my direct view down the aisle. When I looked forward again, there were more shelves. 4, 5. I stopped. That's not. I started, then trailed off. The air felt colder here. Still, the kind of still that presses against your ears. I backed out of the aisle slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the end of it. It didn't change while I watched. Back at the counter, I forced myself to focus. Think. The clock moves when I'm not looking. The aisles change when I'm not looking. The register updates when I'm not looking. The thought formed clearly, and once it did, I couldn't shake it. Something is advancing the store. I looked at the clock again. 2:17 a.m. I hadn't been here that long. Had I? I tried to recall when my shift started. The memory slipped away as soon as I reached for it. I knew I had clocked in. I knew I had unlocked the door. But the exact time was gone. I looked down at my hands. For a moment, they didn't feel familiar. I flexed my fingers. They responded normally. But the sensation lingered. I forced myself to stay still, eyes fixed on the clock. Don't let it move. Don't let anything move. Seconds passed. Or didn't. It was impossible to tell. The second hand remained frozen. The hum of the lights stretched thin, like it was being pulled. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a need to blink, to look away. I resisted it. My vision blurred slightly at the edges. I held on. Then, without meaning to, I glanced down. Just for a fraction of a second. When I looked back up, the clock had jumped forward nearly a full minute. The hour hand had shifted. 2:23 a.m. No, I whispered. My voice sounded distant. I turned, scanning the store. The aisles were longer now. Noticeably longer. The back wall looked far away, almost swallowed by shadow. The lights flickered in sequence, not all at once, but one after another down the length of the store. I stepped away from the counter. The floor seemed to stretch beneath me. Each step took longer than it should have. I looked down again. When I looked back up, the clock read 2:31. My chest tightened. The register beeped behind me. I turned. A new total had appeared. 2,960 yen. Double. The item list was longer now. 6 items. I didn't remember scanning any of them. I didn't remember anyone coming in. I looked toward the door. Closed. Dark outside. I turned back to the clock. It didn't move. I didn't look away. I couldn't. But something else was changing. The store felt older. Subtly, The shelves looked more worn. The edges of the tiles slightly dulled. The hum of the lights deeper, more strained. I realized, slowly, what the clock was doing. It wasn't counting seconds. It was counting moments I wasn't there for. Every time I looked away, the store moved forward without me. Time passed. Events happened. And I wasn't present for them. I looked down at the register again. When I looked back up, 2:45. My breath caught. No, I said again, louder this time. I turned in a slow circle, trying to take everything in at once, trying not to miss anything. But I couldn't see all of it. I couldn't watch every angle. And every time I blinked, something advanced. The aisles lengthened. The lights dimmed. The totals increased. I staggered back to the counter, gripping the edge. The clock ticked forward again. I hadn't seen it move. 2:58. The second hand trembled at the top. I forced myself to keep my eyes on it. Don't look away. Don't let it change. The pressure behind my eyes built again. Stronger. My vision tunneled. I could feel the urge to blink, overwhelming now. I tried to hold it back. Failed. A single blink. When my eyes opened, the clock read 3 o'clock. The second hand was gone. The hum of the lights stopped. Completely. Silence. Absolute. I stood there, frozen. The store didn't feel like the store anymore. The aisles stretched impossibly far, disappearing into darkness that wasn't there before. The products on the shelves were indistinct, like placeholders. The register screen was blank. I looked at the clock. The face had changed. The numbers were gone. Replaced by a single word, printed where the 12 should be. Closed. My reflection faintly appeared in the glass covering it. But it wasn't aligned. It stood slightly behind me. Watching. I turned slowly. The store extended endlessly in every direction now, the aisles forming corridors that looped and overlapped in ways that didn't make sense. And at the far end of one, I saw movement. A figure stepping into view. Wearing the same uniform. Moving with the same posture. It walked toward the counter. Toward me. I looked back at the clock. The word remained. Closed. I didn't remember finishing my shift. I didn't remember leaving. I didn't remember starting. Behind me, I heard the faint click of footsteps on tile. Approaching. I kept my eyes on the clock, afraid to look away again. Because I understood now, it hadn't been counting time. It had been counting me down. And I couldn't tell if I had just reached the end, or if I had already been replaced by the one walking up behind the counter, ready to begin again.